Shenanigans, back again, and welcome to part 3 of the series, the top cards of Hearthstone as of Blackrock Mountain. Today we're looking at the top 10 neutral epics, and unlike the rares, it seems that many of the epics are very niche, and to be honest, it was a little difficult finding 10 good neutral epics. I would say that almost the bottom third of the list is probably the least bad of the neutral epics. But with that said, there's still some really good cards, particularly at the top of the list. So let's get started. First off, let's look at our honorable mention. And the honorable mention goes to the Hobgoblin. Hobgoblin, 3 mana, 2/3. Whenever you play a 1-attack minion, give it +2/+2. Hobgoblin is a very interesting card, and it opens up a lot of design space. Unfortunately, right now it's difficult to build a deck around just one card, right? There's no ways to consistently get the Hobgoblin when you need it. Unlike, say, Magic the Gathering, there are no tutor cards or things like that. So you're kind of at the mercy of card draw as to when you'll actually get the Hobgoblin. And so that makes things a little difficult to build a deck around a certain card. If there was a mechanic like that in Hearthstone, then I think Hobgoblin would be a little bit higher on this list instead of in the honorable mention category. But until that time, Hobgoblin sits as our honorable mention. Moving on to number 10 is another very limited type of card, but it is slightly better than the Hobgoblin, and that is, I don't believe I have one, so we're going to have to bring this up. There we are, the Murloc Warlock. 3 mana, 3/3. All other Murlocs have +2/+1. So this is, again, like the Hobgoblin, it buffs some of the smaller minions, in this case only Murlocs. And you would think that's even a little more limited than, say, the Hobgoblin. And in a way that's true, but there are a few other Murloc cards that help to buff Murlocs as well. Overall making the Murloc synergy probably a lot better than, say, Hobgoblin and 1-attack minion synergy. Murloc Warleader is probably the most important card when it comes from the whole Murlocs as a tribe, in both pushing damage and keeping the Murlocs alive. So, at number 10, Murloc Warleader. Moving on to number 9 is an interesting card, Enhanso Meccano. This is a mech, 4 mana, 3/2, so it's a little costly, but it's all about his battle cry, right? Give your other minions Wind Fury, Taunt, or Divine Shield at random. So what's to be said about Enhanso Meccano? Well, Enhanso Meccano can be a very strong card, particularly in aggressive decks that play a lot of small to mid-sized minions and get them out fairly quickly. So maybe a zoo type of deck, right? And obviously you want to get to that stage where you have several minions already on the board, you drop Enhanso Meccano and give them all kinds of wonderful abilities. Unfortunately, finding the right spot to play Enhanso Meccano can be a little difficult. The 4 mana cost makes it just high enough that it's hard to play too many other cards prior to him in the same turn, and so you're stuck with having to already have kind of a board presence, a significant board presence, before Enhanso Meccano's effect is really worth it. So that's why Enhanso Meccano makes number 9 on our list of epics. Alright, from a card that helps a bunch of smaller to mid-sized minions to one that helps large minions, we move on to number 8. And that, of course, is the Recon Bob You Later. Recon Bob You Later, 2 mana, 3/2, so it's an average stats for its cost. Battlecry, transform a friendly minion into a random minion with the same cost. To start with, obviously it has the basic stats that you'd expect for a 2-drop, and the Battlecry works very well with minions that have high casting costs, and that would namely work in decks like Druid and maybe even Handlock if they had room for Recon Bob You Later. And it works in such a way that it's almost like a heal or sometimes an upgrade. Okay, so let's actually look at the Druid cards for a moment. Specifically, let's take a look at, like, say, Ancient of Lore, right? So 7 mana for a 5/5, and of course it comes with an ability when it enters play. But notice 7 mana for 5/5 isn't particularly strong for its cost. So you might be able to get an attack with him, and as long as it survives, you use the Recon Bob You Later and get a different 7-cost minion, or possibly the same one, in which case it's a heal. In the case of, say, your handlock type of cards, you could play something large, like, say, a Sea Giant. Obviously, if that gets recombobulated, it turns into either a Sea Giant again or a Deathwing. Coming in at number 7 is another limited but relatively powerful card, and that is the Doomsayer. Doomsayer, 2 mana for a 0/7. At the start of your turn, destroy all minions. So with an ability like that, it's obvious to see the power in the Doomsayer. Of course, keeping it alive for one more turn is usually the trick. And Mage has a pretty good way of taking care of things with the use of certain spells, particularly their ability to freeze, with Frost Nova. So obviously, the combination of Doomsayer Frost Nova should keep the Doomsayer alive long enough to have its ability finally go off. I should also note that Doomsayer is often referred to as the minion that doesn't have taunt, but does have taunt, in that your opponent doesn't want their minions to all be destroyed, so they have to kill this. Anyway, that's why Doomsayer makes number 7 on our list. Moving on to number 6, this is where things start to get interesting. We have the piloted Sky Gollum. 6 mana, 6/4, Death Rattle, summon a random 4-cost minion. Obviously, this is a slightly upgraded version of the piloted Shredder. The piloted Sky Golem, even though it's larger, isn't as commonly as played as the smaller version, the Shredder. Well, stats-wise, things don't really line up quite as well as you'd like. As far as value is concerned, the piloted Shredder just on whole has a little more value for its cost. That doesn't mean piloted Sky Golem is a bad card by any means. In fact, you could say that in many ways it's kind of a poor man's Sylvanas, in that when it dies, it's going to give you a relatively decent creature, and sometimes Sylvanas can't even say that. And for the stats, they're about the same. Still, just like the piloted Shredder, it is a sticky minion, very hard to get rid of, you have to kill it twice, and it's going to give you something in return for its death. Piloted Sky Golem is strong enough that it very likely will be silenced if your opponent has the ability to do so. So piloted Sky Golem, number 6 on our list. Moving on to number 5, it's a tie between giants. That, of course, is the Molten Giant. 20 mana, 8/8, cost less for each damage your hero has taken. And the Mountain Giant, 12 mana, 8/8. Cost less for each card in your hand. These two I consider tied for 5th place, due to their overall power and the kind of decks that they go in. Mountain and Molten Giants both go very well in Handlock style deck, where you're drawing cards. If you think about the Warlock's ability, you're going to draw cards and lose life, making both of these cards cheaper. Often you can get a Mountain Giant out as early as turn 4, maybe even 5, and Molten Giants will be relatively free, on average somewhere around turn 7 or 8. These two giants, and most particularly the Molten Giant, also has synergy, oddly enough, in Paladin, if you decide to go with the Holy Wrath combo. Not sure if I have one. Let's go look. No, I do not, but there we go. 5 mana, Holy Wrath, draw a card, and deal damage equal to its cost. In fact, the text over here, come on, Molten Giant. There are times where you can do 20 damage for 5 mana. Interesting stuff. Moving on to number 4, yet another giant, and that's the Sea Giant. Sea Giant I rate a little bit higher than the other two, and that's because he's just a little bit more easy to play, right? You'll commonly see him in the same types of decks that Knife Juggler would work well in. We talked about combos with Implosion, Muster for Battle, and also Unleash the Hounds, so any classes that can generate a number of minions fairly quickly could make very good use of the Sea Giant. Should also note that of the giants, Sea Giant is the only one that can actually be played for its full mana cost, which I feel makes it just slightly more playable than the others. Moving on to number 3, we have a minion that you can find from Naxxramas, That is our good friend, the Shade of Naxxramas. 3 mana, 2/2 stealth. At the start of your turn, gain +1/+1. So what kind of decks does Shade of Naxxramas fit in? It works quite well in combo decks, decks that can buff minions fairly quickly. You commonly see this card in Druid, Rogue, and recently Priest decks. The idea behind the Shade of Naxxramas is that you play it early as possible, leave it sit in stealth to build up its size, and then use a number of your class spells to finally buff the Shade that you can use to kill your opponent in basically one turn. On the downside, Shade of Naxxramas is relatively slow, and you'll have problems playing this early while holding off the aggressive decks. Still, I consider Shade of Naxxramas a very strong card, number 3 on our list of neutral epics. Coming in at number 2, a very strong card, one that I don't believe I currently have right at the moment. That is the Faceless Manipulator. 5 mana for a 3/3. Battlecry, choose a minion, and become a copy of it. Faceless Manipulator is good enough that I would say you should probably craft this if you have decks you know you want to put it into. The 3/3 stats for this card are usually irrelevant. As long as there's another minion on the board, Faceless Manipulator will copy it instead. So why is this card good? Well, 5 mana to copy, say, a Sea Giant. Or say you're playing Handlock and you have a Molten Giant that's already been taunted and buffed by Defender of Argus. 5 mana for a 9/9 taunt is very, very powerful. Optionally, you can use the Faceless Manipulator to copy a powerful minion that the opponent has, helping to even out board presence for only 5 mana. So Faceless Manipulator, number 2 on our top 10 list. Coming in at number 1, a card slightly more powerful, I feel, than even Faceless Manipulator, and it does a very similar thing, and that is the Big Game Hunter. 3 mana for a 4/2, Battlecry, destroy a minion with an attack of 7 or more. So where the Faceless copies a minion, usually a very large one, BGH destroys it. Of course, at 8 mana, you could use the combination of both Faceless and BGH to essentially get a mind control style of effect. BGH also sits at number 1 on our list for its efficiency. It can be placed in any deck, and in most cases will find a time to destroy a larger minion on your opponent's side. And for only 3 mana, the swing in what will happen to the board state makes this a very strong play. Typically, your opponent will spend most, if not all, of their mana for their turn in playing some large threat. And on your turn, you only use 3 mana to remove that threat, leaving you with other options for the rest of the turn. Some have even complained that Big Game Hunter is too strong for its cost, and we're left wondering whether or not they'll ever nerf this card. I would say for the time being, things are in a pretty good state, and if you don't have a BGH, I would highly suggest crafting this card. And that'll do it for our top 10 neutral Hearthstone epics. Join me next time. We'll be looking at the top 10 neutral legends of Hearthstone. Until then, thanks so much for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and take care, guys.